The biggest danger, and there are many dangers, but every day the biggest danger of the Trump presidency is that we are always just a Trump whim away from nuclear war with North Korea. A nuclear exchange cannot be undone. What is happening tonight in the United States Senate can be undone, and it will be undone by the next Democratic president and Democratic Congress. And so it is not the worst thing that is happening in Trump world. The Democrats will repair the damage to tax law that is being done tonight, and it is damage unlike anything we have ever seen before. As many of you know, I used to have a hand in writing tax legislation in the Senate when I was chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee. So I know the history of big corporate special interests in tax legislation, and it is not a pretty history. And it is a bipartisan history. For decades, when Democrats from Texas and Louisiana controlled the Senate Finance Committee, the oil and gas industry had easy access to plead their cases. But there were still senators from northern states who were there and ready to withhold their votes when oil state Democrats tried to make the tax code too embarrassingly generous to their state's industrial giants. And you could embarrass a senator in those days by saying he was pushing a provision for special interests. When my boss became chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, New York's senior senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, everything changed for the oil and gas industry very suddenly in the Finance Committee, and they knew it. But as a New York senator, Senator Moynihan represented Wall Street, and he represented the biggest concentration of high-value commercial real estate in the country, New York City. The exposure to corrupt influences of a New York senator in control of tax legislation in the Senate could not be greater. And there was never the slightest accusation made by anyone that Chairman Moynihan was in service to Goldman Sachs or any other Wall Street firm, all of whom were constituents of his, or any of the huge commercial New York real estate interests and the big New York real estate families, all of whom were constituents of his. And one day we were considering a tax provision that would affect commercial real estate. Our chief tax counsel reviewed the policy issues, and it was a close call. You could make an argument for it, in favor of it. You could make an argument against it. I couldn't tell if Senator Moynihan was leaning one way or the other when, toward the end of our chat, our tax counsel mentioned that this tax provision would do Lou Rudin a lot of good. Lou Rudin was one of the biggest commercial real estate owners in New York City and a friend of Senator Moynihan's for decades and a reliable contributor to Moynihan campaigns and Democratic Party campaigns. The senator and I were not surprised to discover that Lou Rudin had a big interest in this legislation, but had never called either one of us about it. Years later, when I read Lou Rudin's obituary, the New York Times quoted Lou Rudin as saying, "The secret of my relationship with the political world is I never ask them for anything." And as far as I know, that was true. And so there was Senator Moynihan considering what to do about a tax provision that would help a very rich friend of his get richer and perhaps, or perhaps not, be good for the economy of New York City. Senator Moynihan didn't say a word about the merits of the case. Without looking up, he just said, "Lou Rudin has given me too much money for me to vote for this." Senator Moynihan wasn't going to run the risk that someone would be able to say that he voted for a tax break for his friend Lou Rudin, and so he voted against it. He voted against what Lou Rudin wanted because Lou Rudin had contributed to his campaigns. He voted against it because of the possible, just the possible appearance of Senator Moynihan being in service to a special interest. And in this case, it was a special interest who didn't even mention it to Senator Moynihan because Lou Rudin knew exactly what his favorite senator's reaction would have been. Senator Moynihan would have told Lou Rudin personally, "Sorry, I can't vote for it because you have given me too much money." And after Senator Moynihan voted against that provision, Lou Rudin continued to contribute to Pat Moynihan's campaigns because Pat Moynihan was the kind of senator that Lou Rudin, the citizen of New York City, the citizen of New York State, the citizen of the United States of America, wanted to have in the United States Senate. And so, yes, America once had big business owners, including big New York real estate moguls who weren't always out for themselves. And yes, America had United States senators who could be embarrassed by doing the bidding of special interests. And we still have some senators like that. We still have senators who would react the way Pat Moynihan did, but none of them are in the Republican Party. What you are seeing in the United States Senate on the Republican side of the aisle with this tax legislation is the ugliest display of pigs at the trough that I have ever seen in Congress, and I mean ever. What's happening is best exemplified by what has become known as the Corker kickback, thanks to the extraordinary reporting of David Sirota, who discovered and exposed the provision slipped into the tax bill that personally benefits real estate investors and commercial real estate owners like Bob Corker and Donald Trump. David Sirota will join us in a moment, but first, here is Bob Corker earlier today on CNN, where he was pressed repeatedly by Wolf Blitzer on the question of exactly how much money that tax provision is worth to him. And because the bill is now written in legislative language, Bob Corker's accountant could have already read it and given him an exact figure of how much that provision is worth to him next year on his tax returns. He could know that. That's something Bob Corker could already know and might know already, but he repeatedly refused to answer that very simple question: how much is this worth to you? Here is the last thing that Bob Corker said about it after Wolf Blitzer's repeated attempts to get a real answer.
Let me just put it this way, Wolf. My salary each year goes to charity. And it would take many, many, many years for this little nominal thing to even account for 1 year's worth of salary. This has no impact on me that matters. It is absolutely nominal, based on based on a preliminary look, and we're not even sure that it has that nominal impact. So for somebody to say this has something that has a big impact on me is a total stretch, and it just does not.
And that is the face of shame tonight in the United States Senate. Bob Corker has no shame about standing up there and voting for a provision that benefits him. And he claims that he had nothing to do with that provision getting in the legislation, and that does not matter. It is in it. And now the question of decency and honor turns on: are you going to vote for that provision that benefits you? And nothing has changed in this bill on the issue that Bob Corker cares about the most, according to him, which is the deficit. This bill explodes the deficit, and Bob Corker said he would never vote for a bill that increased the deficit by 1 penny. This bill increases the deficit by $1.5 trillion. Nothing has changed. But Bob Corker is not afraid of the appearance of impropriety. David Sirota has now identified 13 Republican senators who will benefit from this provision. David Sirota has also identified other provisions in the bill that will benefit other Republican senators directly, senators all of whom are voting for this bill. And we will get into those provisions in a moment.